This right here is Royal Enfield's super affordable, super entry-level motorcycle, very, very beginner friendly. However, there are some riders out there who question whether or not a motorcycle that's only making 25 horsepower is enough to be safe on the streets in the States. We have huge highways that tend to be pretty darn fast, and motorcycles like this start to gasp for air at about 75 miles an hour. So today, once and for all, we are going to answer the question, is the Scram 411 fast enough to get you where you need to go as your beginner motorcycle? All right guys, a few things before we hit the road. So with my new day in the saddle format, if you want to see my first impressions, that came out last week. So I have it in the cards. It's either over here, or it's in the description. Check all those spots. You'll be able to see what my raw first impressions were like on this motorcycle. Spoiler alert, it's not exactly the splashiest first impression, but it is a nice first impression. Second thing, Royal Enfield actually sent me this motorcycle, so I have it for a good long time. I actually don't know how long I have it. So you're gonna be seeing a handful of videos, a few comparisons with this thing. I might even take it out, shoot it out against the KLR. We'll see how adventurous I'm really feeling. But in the meantime, let's hit the road and start out seeing what this thing is like on the Twisties.
Okie dokie pokies, we're out here on Lime Creek, and normally I wouldn't bring a bike like this out to Lime Creek. That's not usually where I think it shines. But I decided to come out this way because this is a scrambler and I wanted to test it off-road, and my off-road pit is at the end of Lime Creek here. So I was like, screw it, let's turn the cameras on. And I'm not gonna lie guys, I'm having a lot of fun on this bike out here. I really, really am, and I'm not joking. I'm not just saying that for the sake of the video. You know, every now and again a motorcycle kind of excites you and it gets you talking in your helmet. And this bike's doing that for me. I think the reason I'm really enjoying it though is in spite of its flaws, because you can't rely on this motorcycle's engine to make up for like let's say you go into a corner in fourth gear and it's really in reality it's like a second gear corner. On a bigger bike that has more torque, you can trust that even in fourth gear you're going to be able to accelerate out of that corner. Well, you can't really make that, you can't really assume that on the Himalayan, or on the Scram rather. Himalayan Scram 411. I mean, it says both on the side of the motorcycle. But anyway, you can't really rely on the engine to fix a bad corner. Like you can't just wick the throttle open and suddenly you're catching back up, right? So in answering, you know, the general thesis for today's review, is this motorcycle too slow? In a sense, if you're just looking at it from what I just said, sure, maybe it is a little too slow. However, I do think what this bike is going to do is it's going to teach you really how to carry speed through a corner, because if you can't rely on the engine, you have to rely on your momentum, and keeping that momentum going, it's not the easiest thing in the whole world, and it actually takes a little bit of skill to stitch the corners together. I really like that. It's an active way of riding, and you have to, it does take a second to rewire your brain a little bit, but you know, I'm out here and I'm genuinely enjoying the ride. I will, however, say, and this is something I'll probably mention later on in the review, is because the engine here is not the star of the show, because the engine is adequate, it is leaving other things on the motorcycle to shine or perhaps not shine. So let's start with the shining stuff. On a twisty road, I really like the way the suspension feels, honestly. It's feeling pretty darn good. I feel like I probably could use maybe a little bit more preload in the back. It's not telepathic, but it gets on a line and it's holding that line pretty well. I really like the way this thing feels. Second good thing on here, the transmission. Oh boy, this transmission feels really good. I'm a huge stickler for transmission feel. It's one of the things that you're interacting with most on the motorcycle, and if it's, you know, sloppy, or if it doesn't feel particularly good, if it's not positive, it detracts from the riding experience. And because you're working the transmission on this motorcycle so much, it was important that they nailed it, and it feels really good. It's nice and clicky, but not crunchy. I will say too, you can completely easily clutchless shift this guy. Totally easy. Now for the bad, unfortunately, the front brake is pretty woeful. I'm not gonna lie. It's really rough. It is compensated somewhat by the rear brake, but again, this is another Royal Enfield where I'm like, the first thing you have to do is you got to replace this guy. Now normally this is where I would say let's cut over to the specs segment, but nope, we've got to ride this thing off-road, or at least get it in some scrambly spots. So let's head over to my dirt pit and turn a couple of laps in there and see how it feels. Okie dokie, so let's pull into the pit here. There's gonna be some mud, I imagine, because we've had a lot of rain lately, so yeah, there's definitely some mud, and this thing's acting a little squirrely already, but that's not gonna stop me from playing around back here. I might go a little bit slower though, because I don't want to go down on a loaner bike. One of the things I'm noticing immediately as I'm standing up is the same thing I noticed on the Himalayan. The side cases, whatever they're using, there's a bunch of slick mud right here. Yep. Whatever they're using, whatever they're covering, I think it's the airbox, they bow out in a weird way, and when you stand up, it kind of pushes your feet out. You know, it's doing the thing. It's not stellar, and there's not a lot of standing room on this bike. Also, I am noticing that the tires are getting a little bit caked up in this sort of thicker mud here. But you know, if this were my bike and I was planning on spending any time off-road, I would get some Pirelli Rally Scorpions on there. Good grief, there's no torque on this motorcycle, and still the back tire's breaking loose. Look at that tire, man. No wonder I'm struggling. It is just all mud. It's like a slick. Okay, I'm gonna call this dirt test both a failure in a sense and a success in another, because we learned that it can do it even though it's not great, which is pretty much what all scramblers are. Oh boy. I also just learned that it has rubber inserts on the foot pegs, and my foot just slipped. Those would need to come off. And it would need some new tires. But you know what? I'm out here, I'm goofing around, and that's all that counts. So let's pull this bike over and let's talk some specs, and I'm gonna do that over here where it's thicker mud, because I'm insane. Okay, come on, Hemi, come on, there you go. Do the thing, Scrambler.
So diving on in with the specs on this guy, we've got a single cylinder 411cc air and oil cooled engine in here that's putting down 24 horsepower and 24 foot-pounds of torque. Yeah, it might not sound like a lot when you consider that this bike weighs in at 432 pounds wet and ready to ride. It really seems like it's a combination for a slow motorcycle, and you would be right. This thing is not the fastest thing in the world, but its power is totally usable. Yeah, you're not going to be super confident rolling down the highway at 70 miles an hour, as you'll see in a little bit, but you know what? It's going to get the job done. Throwing a leg over this motorcycle, talking about the ergonomic setup on it, it feels very similar to the Himalayan. In fact, I would say it feels almost exactly the same as the Himalayan, although I will say it does feel lighter between the legs when you sit on it. Put my leg up, I still don't like the tank shape. It looks cool, but this edge right here does kind of bump into my knee as I'm riding. If I move my feet around, I do find myself hitting that. I am 6'2" though, so this is probably going to fit the average rider 5'10", 5'11", and under very, very well. It also has a 31.3-inch seat height, so it's totally approachable. You can see as a 32-inch inseam here, I've got quite a bend in my knee. The seat is comfy, the reach to the bars is nice. The only thing I will say is I find myself sliding around a lot, and maybe I didn't notice this on the Himalayan, but it does kind of give me a wedgie. Now, diving into the pros and cons on this motorcycle, I'm gonna start out with the price as the first biggest pro. This thing's only $5,099. You're gonna be able to get this thing super, super cheap. Now, I will point out that something like a Ninja 400 is a little bit more expensive, but not by much. With ABS, it's $5,899. So you're talking $800 more, and you do get an engine that's putting down almost twice as much power. And that does give me a chance to dive into my first con. I do wish this thing was making a little bit more power. It would be nice to see this thing around about 40 horsepower. Something very similar to the DRZ would be great. I have heard rumblings through the comment section that there is a 450cc variant that's water cooled that's coming. I haven't heard anything about that. It is true you can get more power, but with more power comes more complexity, and this thing is about as simple as it gets. I think it has ABS. Does it? Yes, it does. It's got ABS. That's about the most complicated thing on this motorcycle. My last biggest con on this motorcycle, it's a real big bummer, and it permeates through all of the Royal Enfields that I've ridden, and I really hope that they address this going forward. It is this front brake. I know that the Bybri brakes on here are much better than this front brake would let you to believe. This master cylinder, it's atrocious, and it's not getting better the more I ride it. Last thing, the looks. Personally, I like this. However, I have seen a whole bunch of people in the comments and on Discord saying that this is about the ugliest motorcycle that they've ever seen. So it really is gonna come down to personal taste. I think it kind of has that old Land Cruiser vibe about it, and I really like it in the red and white. It actually looks like it's coming for the Desert Sled. And spoiler alert, we might have a video comparing those two motorcycles coming up soon. But with that being said, let's get this thing back out on the road and really see how it does on the highway.
Okie dokie pokies, now pulling away on the highway here, the first thing I want to say about the Scram is that it's going to get the job done. It's not going to do it with a lot of pomp and circumstance. It's not going to wow you. It is going to get you, though, from A to B. And whether or not you require a whole bunch of flair and all of that good stuff, that's up to you. So, first and foremost, let me say that this right here is not really like what you would consider a highway. This is, you know, it's one of our faster byways, I'll call it. This is 360. The speed limit's 55 through here. And on a road like this, the Himalayan is, or well, the Himalayan Scram 411, it is perfectly fine. As you can see, right now we are stuck at a red light, but this is actually going to give me a good opportunity to show you the get up and go out of this bike. Feel the fury, baby! All 411 cubes, fire breathing right underneath you. Yeah, no, it's not exactly fast, but you know what? It is getting me exactly where I need to go, and I have been riding this thing around both on just regular streets and highways today, and I gotta say, it's not an unpleasant place to be on the highway. First of all, the seating position, while it's a little bit cramped for a guy my size, it's actually relatively comfortable. It feels more naked bikey than I think is intended, especially for a motorcycle that's based on an adventure bike, but you know what? It's fine. I'm used to having my feet kind of up underneath me like this. Now, normally on the highway, this is where I would actually talk about technology. There's not really a whole lot of tech to write home about on this guy. It's got ABS, and then it's got a tripper dash. That's kind of it, which, you know what? It doesn't need anything else. It would be weird if this thing had rider modes. So let's talk a second about the tripper dash. Is it something that I would use? No. I have been using it. Currently, it is stuck. I had turned my phone, I turned the screen off or whatever, and It doesn't seem like it's running in the background. It has basically annihilated my phone's battery today. It went from like 60 to 40% in 20 or 30 minutes or something like that. So I would not use the tripper dash. If I was going to be looking for navigation, I would just use a quad lock mount on the handlebar. I mean, it's a solved problem. And theoretically, if this wasn't on here, you could have room for a tachometer or something like that. It doesn't need to be a big sweeping needle or anything like that. Just something so I know what my engine speed is. That would be great. I mean, we have a gear position indicator. Why not a tachometer? And the Himalayan actually had a tachometer on it. They got rid of it when they cut down this front end. Speaking of which, I actually prefer not having any wind protection up here. Beyond that, though, there's really not that much to write home about the little Scram 411 here. It's going to get the job done. If you need it to go faster than 75 miles an hour, you're really begging for it. Now, with all of that being said, I am going to pull this bike over one last time, and we're going to answer some Discord questions about this motorcycle, because I would reckon that we've got a fair few wondering whether or not this thing is basically just a Himalayan. So let's go see what the Discord boys have to say, and I'll catch you guys in a second.
Now, if you would like to participate in these Q&A sessions, all you got to do is join the Patreon down below. Link is in the description. It's the best way for you to support the channel, so if you like what I do and you want to help out, you'll get access to the Discord server, early access to videos, and some other things that I'm working on in the background. But suffice to say, all that information is down below, and you can participate in these Q&As. So let's dive on in with Don ATX, who asks, does the wheel size change make a difference in how it handles versus the Himalayan? Yes, it's not like the most crazy change. It handles a lot better, but the Himalayan wasn't that bad, and this isn't also like the sharpest tool in the box either. So it's a better handling motorcycle, but if you're tossing it up and you're like, oh, I want a bike that handles better, Himalayan, Scram, they're gonna be functionally the same, I'm not gonna lie. Nescafe asks, is the Scram a worthy urban successor to the Himalayan? So fun fact, this guy is actually the owner of the Himalayan that he used to own it. So former owner of the Himalayan that I reviewed last year. Yeah, I totally think that this is a great motorcycle. It's a stripped back Himalayan, but not so much that it doesn't look like a Himalayan. It kind of just looks like, you know, they took the front end off and they took the bags off. So it's basically just like Himalayan light, and the Himalayan was fun, so this is fun. Papa Peach, are there cam and big bore kits? Yes, there are. Chemical here claims that there's a 477 kit, but I do know that there are big bore kits and cams that you can use to increase the compression and power that this bike is making. I don't know how much it adds off the top of my head, but sure, I'd buy one. Why not? El Gabor asks, would you rather ride this or the upcoming Himalayan 650 in their intended environments? And do you think they should make a 650 Scram? I didn't know there was a Himalayan 650. I had heard rumblings of a 450 liquid-cooled thingamajig, but a 650 would be great. I love that 650 engine, and a Scram makes a ton of sense. If both of those come to pass, I would definitely prefer the 650, A, because it sounds better, B, because it's got a little bit more power, and C, it sounds better. That little Royal Enfield parallel twin 650 sounds great. And then rounding things out here, the second half of Dasco's question, how does it hold up next to a Spark 401, the used CB650, or a Versys X300? Better than the Versys X300. The CB500X is gonna have a little bit more under the hood, and it is technically an adventure bike. This is a scrambler. And then the Spark 401, that thing's just a sweetheart. It's hard to compete with that motorcycle. Not to mention it is very aggressively priced. So if I was gonna order it, for me, it would be Spark 401, it would be Scram 411, then it would be CB500X, and then Versys X300. I will never allow anything with the name Versys in it to be high up in a list. It's just, I'm sorry, it's the rules here. I don't make the rules, I just enforce them. And with that being said, it's time to get this thing back out of the road one last time start wrapping up my thoughts on the Scram 411.
Now guys, if you've watched my Day in the Saddles before, you know I tend to like to finish this last segment out in a spot where I think the motorcycle is served best, by where it's happiest in life. And personally, I think that the little Scram 411 is a great beginner bike for somebody who lives in the middle of a city. Let's throw out a little scenario real quick. Let's say you're like 25, maybe a little bit younger, maybe you're in college, and you need a way to get around, but you can't afford to have a car. And you live in a place like Texas where most of the time it's pretty temperate, aside from the fact that it gets swelteringly hot in the summer, but that's besides the point. You don't make a ton of cash. Maybe you're getting your first job, or you're working through college or something like that. You need something that's affordable, something that's going to get you from point A to point B, and something that's going to be fun for you to use on the weekend. Now, there's a ton of bikes out there that fit the mold, but I think that this is a really solid contender, especially if you live in a spot that's not as disparate as Texas is. Some places where the distances you need to travel aren't so great. Like, so my tripper is basically set right now for the Texas capital, and I'm not sure if you can see that skyscraper in the distance, but that's more or less where it is. I'm still like a good 10 miles away from it. This is a totally fine distance to travel, but before I was like 20 or 30 miles away. That's a bit of a distance, I'm not gonna lie. And a distance where you're traveling 30 to 40, 20 to 30, that kind of big mileage, you tend to aim for the highways. At least you do here in Texas. And if you're aiming for the highways, you encounter the flaws of this motorcycle a lot faster, that being that it's not as potent as other bikes in the category. But if you aren't on big, fast Texas highways and you're just cruising around 30 to 35 to 40 miles an hour, this thing's great. It's absolutely great. You can beat the crap out of this bike and it'll just take it, and it'll be totally fine. You know, you can just dump the clutch at a red light and be totally fine when the light turns green, and just, you know, rip off the line. I've done it a handful of times on this bike because it's just sort of fun, you know. And again, I think one of the best things about bikes like this is they're low maintenance. They're very cost efficient. They're very cheap to own and to maintain, and they're forgiving. You don't need to worry about, oh, you know, I'm a little bit low on oil, I need to immediately run to Cycle Gear or the dealership and get some more. No, you should definitely top it up, but you don't need to like do it right away, which is the nice thing with bikes like this. They're super simple to own. Of course, Royal Enfield would never condone that kind of behavior, but I can tell you from personal experience on my KLR, big thumpers like this, they just don't care. Now, when I talked about the Himalayan, I was very effusive towards that motorcycle. I was very pleased with the package. Now, this is $5,099. I personally think that that's a little bit spendy for this motorcycle. Given how much nothing is really on this bike, I would like to pay like $4,600 for it. I would like to get rid of the tripper on here to save a little bit of cash because I'm not going to use it. And then I'd like to see the price around $4,600. I think at that point you've got a motorcycle that you don't even have to make the justifications for owning it. It justifies itself. Now, that being said, I used to spend a lot of time at TJ Cycles here in Austin because they're the KTM dealership, and as you guys know, my KTM needed to go to the KTM doctor quite a lot. And I spent a lot of time in there just looking at bikes that were on the showroom floor, and I saw a bunch of Royal Enfields because they're the Royal Enfield dealer here. And I gotta tell you, very rarely did I see them going for the actual like MSRP. I saw them on sale all the time. So I have a feeling that if you're in the market for something like this, if you're just a little bit patient, or you come into the deal with a little bit of cash, you'll be able to get a great deal on a bike like this. But there you have it, guys. Those are my thoughts on the Royal Enfield Scram 411. It's a fun little bike, and you know, I really would recommend it to a lot of folks. I would recommend it to a lot of people who are looking to get into motorcycling for the first time. I think this is a great beginner entry. If maybe just a smidge overpriced. A huge shout out to Royal Enfield for sending this motorcycle out to me. I really appreciate them supporting what I do here. I was not expecting to get that email from Royal Enfield, but alas, we do. So expect some more stuff on this guy, and probably some more Royal Enfields generally. And with that, I'm gonna sign off. I'm gonna head home, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. See you later.